and has assured us that if the folks on both sides can unite against the villainous establishment, we will be invincible. Last week, he appeared on the PBD podcast to explain this new approach, which he won't really admit is a new approach, but even so, here you go.
Here's what my left-wing friends don't understand. They think you guys are all MAGA, and MAGA means it's a cult, and you're never going to disagree with Trump. You're never going to disagree with each other, and that you are like their father's Republicans. But you're not their father's Republicans.
What's happening, everybody? Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire warned conservatives to be careful when accepting the recent sudden changes of heart by leftists like Cenk Uygur. Matt Walsh questions the sincerity and motivation of Cenk Uygur's acceptance of MAGA after demonizing him for his entire career. With that, let's watch Matt Walsh call Bullsh on Cenk Uygur's recent softening on some of his most long-held far-left beliefs. Let's go.
Or sort of seeing it, and then being immediately embraced by many on the right, even celebrated and amplified as voices of reason. And I think the best way to explain my concerns is to point to another one of these newly minted voices of reason. This one also comes to us courtesy of the Young Turks. In fact, it is the creator of the show, Cenk Uygur. Now, Cenk has been a passionate, some would say vicious, unhinged, hysterical critic of Trump and MAGA and conservatives generally for many, many years. And yet, 2 weeks ago, he tweeted that he is now somehow feeling optimistic after the guy he despised and the movement he has opposed with his whole heart and soul just won. He wrote, quote, "I've been trying to figure out why I'm more optimistic now than I was before the election, even though I was so against the guy who won. I know now. MAGA is not my mortal enemy, and neither is the extreme left. My mortal enemy is the establishment, and they have been defeated." Now, despite being a far-left commentator who has demonized conservatives for literally decades, he now says that MAGA is not his enemy. The establishment is his enemy. In other tweets and comments, he's called for unity between the two sides. He's criticized the extreme left, or as he now apparently calls them, the max left, and has assured us that if the folks on both sides can unite against the villainous establishment, we will be invincible. Last week, he appeared on the PBD podcast to explain this new approach, which he won't really admit is a new approach, but even so, here you go.
Here's what my left-wing friends don't understand. They think you guys are all MAGA, and MAGA means it's a cult, and you're never going to disagree with Trump. You're never going to disagree with each other, and that you are like their father's Republicans. But you're not their father's Republicans. And so our side, I've been trying to get them to realize that Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, all these folks that take the money, they're not on your side. They're on the establishment side, right? And guys, today, I think that, we could do something historic. I think that we could actually unite the left flank and the right flank. And I've got a model for how to do that, and I want to run it by you guys. Before, when I battled the right wing, it was a wall, right? I'm just like, nobody's listening to one another. They're just doing talking points. I hated it. And then MAGA looked like they were 100%. I'll be honest. I mean, in 2020, I was super pissed. And I said, look, I don't want to talk to Trump supporters. All I hear is the same thing. Trump, 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 Trump. And they never waver. So what I'm saying to the left now is, no, I'm seeing something new and different here. The MAGA base has changed. Okay, that doesn't mean they don't like Trump. It doesn't mean that they're not right wing. But there is a significant portion of the MAGA base now that is, in my opinion, right wing populists who are actually anti-establishment, actually anti-corruption, actually anti-war. And what I'm trying to tell the left is, take the win. Take the win. We've been standing opposed here for 20 years, trying to cut the Pentagon, trying to be anti-war, getting money out of politics. If people say yes, for God's sake, that's our lost tribe. Those are our right-wing brother and sisters who are Americans, who are populists, who agree with us. Let's go fight the establishment together, because if we're united, they cannot stop us.
Brothers and sisters.
So if this supposed conversion of folks like Cenk or wake-up call is in fact a scam. I've fallen for it to an extent. My usual comment is when I praise something that Cenk or Anna says, is I always say, I give credit where it's due. But I never say that I believe that Cenk or Anna, for that matter, have made some crazy conversion to the right or ever will. You got to understand, the bar for logic at TYT is very, very low. So if they say something remotely reasonable that the right has known forever, we're like, yes, yes, and we give them all sorts of credit. But like I said, that bar is low. And I think you need to take all of these people on an individual basis, because some may be sincere and some may not. And the jury's still out on most of them, but we'll stick to Cenk with this video. Even if he's being 100% honest about his feelings, how out of touch is he to think that we're all champing at the bit to hear his plan to unify MAGA and progressives? Who's looking for that? That ego sounds familiar, doesn't it? That's the Cenk we know and love. And there's some things that are missing from all of the things we've patted him on the back for, or been pleasantly surprised by about his positions changing on things, is we have seen zero acknowledgement that he's been wrong about a lot of things for a very, very long time. He hasn't shown any remorse or made any kind of apology that he has stared into the camera, screaming at the top of his lungs, literally, calling you and me fascists, racists, losers, homophobes, transphobes, Nazis, MAGA idiots. But we haven't heard something close to apologizing for misunderstanding who conservatives are at their core and what motivates them to believe what they do and vote for whom they do. Or just show that he's at least trying to understand our values, because that's what's really going to unite us. And the final thing, Cenk says that MAGA has changed. No, we haven't. I haven't. I'll speak for myself, but from my observations, the party has not changed. But by saying that, what he gets to do is say, MAGA's changed so I can accept you now, not I've changed and I understand you a little bit better. Do you understand how there's no acknowledgement of wrongdoing or humility or remorse? He's very careful about the words he uses when he's making these statements that we're like, oh, wow, maybe he's waking up. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
Very nice sentiment. Cenk says that he has a plan. In fact, he said in the interview he had a plan to unite us all. He's all about unity. And he says that the MAGA base has changed. Now it is actually anti-establishment, anti-corruption, and anti-war. But, you know, there are some rather significant problems here. And the first and most obvious is that the MAGA base has always been anti-establishment, anti-corruption, and anti-war. Those have been by far the defining features of the base from day one. But Cenk pretends that this was only a recent development so that, again, he can avoid actually admitting that he was wrong. In fact, he goes further. He takes credit. He pretends that the MAGA base has come to him, that this is a left-wing win, basically. Now, the other problem, and it's a big one, is that Cenk extends this olive branch to Trump's supporters and praises them for their stand against corruption and war. But here's what he was saying about Donald Trump as recently as last October.
He's a dictator. He's a fascist. That's not hyperbole. So, and here, I'll upset a bunch of people on the left. Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley are not fascists. They're terrible people for other reasons. But they've never done a coup against America. They don't use direct Nazi quotes that Trump does. The only fascist that is an actual threat to democracy is Donald J. Trump. He already tried to end this democracy once. And guys, last thing. The other day, he said, immigrants are poisoning the blood of our nation. That quote has only been used by Adolf Hitler and Donald J. Trump. So he's telling you ahead of time, I'm a Nazi. It's not like I didn't warn you. I used absurd Hitler quotes. I pulled them out of history and I said them for no reason, just to let you know I am a Nazi.
All right, by the way, that was an interview that...
Quick point to Matt. He said he didn't want to research Cenk that much, but yes, you can find multiple accounts of Cenk using the Hitler, Nazi, all that stuff about Trump very, very recently, as recent as after the election. So we're to believe that his change of heart is so great that now he accepts a fascist ruler in our country? Come on. Let's get back to the video.
Cenk did when he was running for president, because apparently he ran for president. Now, I follow politics for a living. I literally never heard that he ran for president. I did not once did that news cross my radar. So, in other words, the run did not go very well. I think is you may be surprised to learn. So, anyway, let me see if I understand this correctly. Trump is a fascist Nazi dictator, and yet his win makes you optimistic for the country, and the supporters of the fascist Nazi dictator are not your enemies? They're your brothers and sisters? Is that it, Cenk? You're optimistic that Hitler himself was elected? And you want to unite with Hitler's supporters? You want to unite with literal, actual Nazis? So what are you, coming out as a Nazi sympathizer? Is that what's happening? Now, you might say that I'm not being very charitable. Now, after all, that was a year ago. Now, granted, I could probably find about 300 examples of Cenk calling Trump Hitler in the last 2 months, but I didn't feel like spending that long watching Cenk clips on YouTube, so this is the one we're going with. Maybe there aren't any clips more recent than that. I don't know. Maybe Cenk had this conversion experience and became a reasonable moderate right after that segment was recorded. Maybe he's been a reasonable person for a whole year. Now, that would mean he spent 53 years of life as a left-wing crackpot and 1 year as a rational human being. That's good enough, isn't it? Why should we listen to him and embrace him as a thought leader? Okay, so let's not reach all the way back into the ancient past of 14 months ago. What if we went back 3 days or one...
If you like watching videos like these, like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Let's get back to the video.
One day before that interview with PBD that we saw earlier, at the beginning. 3 days ago, Cenk was on his show condemning me for the speech that I gave at the Do No Harm rally outside the Supreme Court on Wednesday. Now, in this speech, I condemn the abuse of children and the ideology that promotes it. I say that this ideology must be entirely defeated. I use the word erase in direct reference to the ideology, not to the people, but to the ideology. And I say that about the ideology because it is an ideology that rejects basic reality and promotes and carries out the horrific medical abuse of children. Cenk didn't much like what I said, and it didn't make him feel very unified, apparently. I don't think I'm one of these brothers and sisters of his, it turns out. Watch.
So in this case, the ACLU lawyer you're talking about, I love that the brother set history there and is the first trans person to argue in front of the Supreme Court. That's a great day in America. Just another stepstone in equality, right? Now, at the same time, he was on TV the other day saying 2-year-olds know if they're trans. And I'm like, that's nuts, totally nuts. 2-year-olds don't know anything. 2-year-olds often don't know their names. How do they know if they're trans and ready for hormone surgery? Are you nuts? So I don't agree with him on that at all. I don't know why he would say such an absurd thing, right? Okay, now let's go to the Max Right and the clip we just showed you. Far, far worse. Talking about what? They're not going to stop until trans ideology is entirely erased from the earth. Now, when you talk with that kind of language, what do you think that trans people are going to think? It sounds like you're trying to wipe them off the face of the earth. Like, don't tell me that this is just about, hey, a disagreement about puberty blockers, because we're about to have that conversation. That's not the conversation you're having. You and Marjorie Taylor Greene, when you say it's satanic, are having a conversation about how we should all hate trans people and we should wipe them out. And so if you say, oh, no, it has plausible deniability because he didn't say trans people, he said ideology. Okay, shoe on the other foot. Let's try. Oh yeah, the left is not going to stop until Christian ideology is entirely erased from the earth. Does that sound good? You like that one? Until white ideology is wiped from the earth. Does that sound good? No, it doesn't sound good. It sounds terrible. Why does it sound terrible? Because you're obviously attacking that group, okay? And you're hiding behind one word, pretending that you don't mean to, but it's not. You're not even hiding anymore. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying trans people are satanic.
So, how is that not deeply, deeply hateful? So, right wing, if you want us to have a reasonable conversation in this country, I'm not going to have conversations with the max right who are lunatics on this.
Okay, well, it's fine because no one's trying to have a conversation with you in the first place, Cenk. If you keep acting like this, I'm not going to talk to you, okay? That's fine. I'm fine with that. Deal. So Cenk begins right off the bat by affirming that the female ACLU lawyer is a man. He said he disagrees with the lawyer about transing 2-year-olds, but then declares that what I said is far, far worse. My opinion about an ideology is worse than physically castrating a 2-year-old. That's what he just said. Then Cenk wants to know how I would feel if he said that Christian ideology should be erased or white ideology should be erased. Well, I'm happy to answer that for you. So if you said that white ideology should be erased, I would be opposed to that idea, and because I would have to assume that you meant that you wanted to erase white people. I know you're going to say, oh, see, there, I got you. No, but that's because, Cenk, white ideology isn't a thing. It doesn't exist. There is no ideology shared by white people across the whole world. If you made that statement, you could only mean that you want to erase white people because there is no such thing as white ideology. Now, there is obviously such a thing as trans ideology. That is an actual thing. It's the ideology that Cenk himself mildly disagrees with by saying that he wouldn't want to trans a toddler. As for erasing Christian ideology, I would strongly disagree with that statement because Christian ideology or Christian teaching, which is what I would take that statement to mean, and by the way, if you wanted to switch it over and say trans rather than trans ideology, trans teaching, we could call it that too, okay? But when it comes to Christian teaching, Christian ideology, it's a positive force in the world. It has done immeasurable good for mankind. It has shaped Western civilization for the better. So not all ideologies are created equal. So there are things you could say about one ideology, and if you say it about that ideology, it's a fair thing to say, whereas if you said it about another one, it would not be fair. How could that be true? Well, because not all ideologies are the same. And on that point, I've got a question for you, Cenk. What if I said that white supremacist ideology should be erased? Would you object to that? Would you accuse me of calling for a genocide against white people? No, you wouldn't. In fact, you would wholeheartedly agree. And that's because you understand the distinction between people and ideologies. You understand that, obviously, your fundamental goal when you oppose an ideology is for it to eventually no longer exist. If you think an ideology is evil, if you think it does nothing but harm, if you think it hurts people, then you want it to be gone, to no longer exist, to be erased. Not by killing the people who profess the ideology, which would be not only wrong, but also, as history shows, a very ineffective way of actually erasing an ideology anyway. Instead, you want to rid the world of it by exposing it and defeating it and discrediting the ideas that it espouses. This is a distinction that I know you're smart enough to understand, but you pretend you don't in this case because you actually agree with trans ideology. That's the problem. You don't have a problem with the way I oppose it, but rather with the fact that I do, which I know because you start by fundamentally agreeing with the ideology when you affirm the manhood of somebody who is 100% female. Now, Cenk says that I'm a lunatic on the trans issue, even though I have been right about the issue for 10 years, while he's just now coming around to mildly criticizing some of the excesses of this, what he perceives to be excesses of this ideology. But even if his criticisms are weak and tentative and toothless, which they are, he is still inching ever so slightly in my direction. I have not come his direction even 1 centimeter. He is cautiously tiptoeing towards me on this topic while still condemning me as a lunatic on the same topic. Now, the case of Cenk.
So Cenk said 2-year-olds don't know that they're trans. This is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier. This is the kind of thing Cenk can say and we're like, yeah, we applaud him for it. That shows how low our standard is for rationality with people like Cenk. That video clip is a great example of where you start to see some cracks in the armor of Cenk's new transformation, or whatever you want to call it. Because he's reverting back to his baseline, classic Cenk. He knows the difference between wiping out an ideology and wiping out a group of people. But I see what he's doing because he's been doing it for years. He hyperbolizes something someone said. He also always has to use his aggressive voice when quoting them, like, I want to erase your ideology, to make it sound more sinister, right? I might not like Cenk a lot sometimes, but he's not dumb. He knows better. He knows exactly what Matt Walsh is saying, but for some reason, he can't hide his disdain for conservatives. So this gives us a lot more reason to pause before we welcome him with open arms to our side, you know? Anyway, let's get back to the video.
Uygur's non-conversion conversion perfectly illustrates all of the reasons why conservatives must take these sorts of people with a giant boulder-sized chunk of salt. Now, it's of course possible that somebody who was once an extreme leftist might actually see the light. When that happens, we should embrace them with open arms and generous spirits. But if it's genuine, we should see on their part some amount of remorse. They should be willing to admit they were wrong. They should apologize to the people on our side who they have unfairly demeaned and slandered and villainized. If all of that happens, then I'll be the first to shake their hand and welcome the prodigal son as he returns. Yet even in that case, I would not immediately take that person and put them on stage and listen to their ideas like they're thought leaders of a movement they just joined 80 seconds ago. If you've been wrong about everything forever and have now changed your mind, I'm glad you changed your mind, but you certainly have less insight, less wisdom, and less to offer intellectually than people who have not spent their entire adult lives on the wrong side of literally every issue. So you, as the person crossing over, should recognize that and have humility and be willing to take a back seat. And yet, out of all the janks in the world, out of all the radical leftists who have been reborn either as moderates or conservatives or whatever they're calling themselves now, almost none of them fall into the category I just described. Almost none of them have ever shown any remorse or any humility. Almost none of them have apologized to any of the people who they lied about and defamed and whose reputations they tried to destroy. Almost none of them have even been willing to admit that they were wrong. Instead, they claim that they've remained consistent while the left abandoned them. And this is, as I said, at the absolute most, only partially true. There's always at least another part, the part where, in fact, they have drastically changed their tune on a number of serious issues, but they won't admit it. At the very least, these are people who ignored and probably scoffed at and demeaned the conservatives who told them that the left was on a slippery slope into madness. They didn't listen. So at the very least, they were wrong about that. But they won't admit that either. And yet they show up and they have all their ideas, and we're supposed to listen to them. And they even have the gumption to turn around to conservatives who have been in this movement forever and try to lecture them. And so I'll tell you how to really argue on these issues. What the hell do you know? You've been wrong about everything. You just started being sort of right about a few things 10 seconds ago. Maybe have some humility and shut up and listen for a few. You haven't listened at all your entire life. Maybe you should be listening now. So what all this tells us, at best, is that these people still have all of the same arrogance and ignorance that made them radical leftists in the first place. It also tells us that these are not credible voices we should be listening to or taking seriously. Not everybody is a thought leader. Okay, not everyone has a platform with a large audience. In fact, most people don't. And if you've been wrong about everything and are still too arrogant to even admit it, even while you try to cozy up to the people you've demonized for years, then you should certainly be in the non-thought leader crowd. Okay, especially considering that about 99% of the people who are not thought leaders on our side are vastly more equipped for the role than you are. But of course, this is all just the best case scenario. You know, so far, I've only really considered the possibility that these supposed former radical leftists have sincerely converted, but are just too egotistical and shallow to admit their own errors. There is the other scenario, which I think in many cases is far more likely. That's the scenario where the conversion is not remotely sincere, where somebody like Cenk Uygur pretends to have turned a new leaf and discovered a strange new respect for the conservative base for the one simple and straightforward reason that his traffic is tanking and the clicks are drying up and he's looking for a new shtick. He's going where the money and the audience are. Now, I can't see inside the souls of any of these people or read their minds, but I can read between the lines. And when I look there, I see the word grifter in giant bold letters. That's why I'm not interested in hearing Cenk's ideas for how to unite and heal the country. I'm not really interested in hearing his ideas about anything because he has no credibility. And he is still today, I'm afraid to say, canceled.
For me, this video has been a really good cautionary tale. I think, in my opinion, conservatives overall are more welcoming by far than the other side, and I believe more loving and forgiving. But we can't allow that to make us naive and be made to look like fools later. Not to mention, I think you all can relate, but I'll speak for myself. There's a certain satisfaction that we all get when someone who's been railing against the right forever finally has a wake-up call. And in our heads, we get to think, yes, you're finally getting it. See, we haven't been lying. We've been right forever. And I like to wear that as a badge. Like, see, even this craziest leftist you've ever seen, even he agrees with us. But just because I enjoy that feeling, I can't fall into the trap to be like, okay, well, Cenk's on our side now. Who's next? And to Matt's last point, that there is a absolute possibility that this whole thing's a grift. Let's not forget, Cenk's running a business. So is seeing him and Anna lean more towards the right on some issues good for business? You betcha. His fans will click because they can't believe it, and the comment section will be buzzing like crazy with arguments. And then the right will click because of that good feeling I just talked about when someone on the left wakes up. But I think Matt gave us a lot to be cautious about, not just with Cenk, but with anybody who has disagreed with us and railed on us forever and suddenly says, oh, I think we can work together. But specifically with regard to Cenk, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Is this a completely calculated business move? Is he sincere? Is it a little of both? Or is it something else? Curious to hear what you think. Anyway, that's it for this video. If you like watching woke idiots get called out by rational folks on the right, then click on one of the two videos that just popped up on your screen. Otherwise, as always, I really, really appreciate you watching. The end.